A lot of Americans are beginning to wake up to the fact that Europe provides a much higher quality of life than America, and the Americans who have the means and the freedom to do so are acting accordingly. They are packing their belongings, they're hopping on these one-way flights, and they are moving over to Europe. And one of the countries that a lot of Americans are honing in on in particular is the Netherlands. And there is a very good reason for this. It's because the Netherlands is one of the best countries in perhaps the best continent on the planet. And on top of that, a lot of Dutch people speak and understand English, so it's a very easy country to navigate as an American. But even if the people didn't speak and understand English, it's just a very good place to be, in large part because of the urban planning. Now, a lot of these aforementioned Americans are moving to places like Amsterdam, Rotterdam, and Utrecht. However, in my experience, having lived in the Netherlands for 14 months, so a little over 1 year, while those cities seem like great places, I myself have only been to Utrecht for 1 day at that, actually, the gold is found in the smaller areas, the areas that Americans have never heard of, the areas that some Dutch people have never even heard of. For example, I spent the last month in the Netherlands before I returned to America and then ultimately ended up here in Thailand in a town called Vassen. Vassen is a town in Gelderland, and it's a town that's so small that before we went there, my girlfriend had never actually heard of it, and she was born and raised in the Netherlands. And what I quickly found being in that small town of 12,000 inhabitants is that you don't have to be in a big city or even a big suburb in order to enjoy a lot of the benefits that Dutch urban planning provides. Bearing that in mind, in this video, I want to react to this video from Not Just Bikes about how small towns are great in the Netherlands, because I am sure he can articulate this much, much better than I can. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get into this reaction.
We've lived in the Netherlands for 5 years now, and during that time, we've been to many different cities and towns. Now, obviously, I talk about Amsterdam a lot on this channel because that's the city I live in, but I routinely show clips from other places that I've been to in the country.
Not to cut you off, they're not just bikes, but look at how free-flowing everything appears in this video. I mean, he's not just cherry-picking the best of the best. This is just the norm in the Netherlands, especially in the cities. Not just Amsterdam, but Utrecht, Den Bosch, Breda, Tilburg, etc. These are some of the cities that I myself visited. You can see the infrastructure is not only visually appealing, but it's practically appealing, where everything just flows seamlessly. You have bikes next to cars. You see that's one of the small cars that you'll find in the Netherlands. And you have the trains, and all of them work side by side. And there doesn't seem to be a lot of chaos there. It's just very free-flowing and well-designed.
That's the city I live in, but I routinely show clips from other places that I've been to in the country. A lot of the time, I didn't go to these places specifically to film them, they were just some of the places I had to go because I was going to an appointment or visiting friends or just living my life. And while I grabbed a few video clips here and there, I never collected enough footage to make a complete video about any of these places, especially in the early days. But a lot of these places are really interesting, and I think you'll find them interesting too, because one of the things that really honestly just blew me away after moving to the Netherlands is just how good things are pretty much everywhere.
Yep. I agree, 100%.
When we got to the Netherlands, we tried to get out of the city as much as possible to get to know our new country. Before I had a YouTube channel, I used to take photos or videos of things I found interesting, and it's really funny to look back on a lot of what I thought was worth filming. Most of these videos are too short as they were never meant to be posted to YouTube, so you'll have to excuse me if I have to loop some of them. So anyway, let's begin. We have visited the city of Haarlem several times, both before moving to the Netherlands and after, as it's an easy trip from Amsterdam by train.
Haarlem is a very, very nice city as well. I never would have visited it had it not been for Sky. It's Sky, if you're watching this, or if you watch It's Sky, shout out to you, shout out to him. He He put me on game, and I'm not gonna lie, that's a city that I want to return to. It might give Utrecht a run for its money as far as my favorite city that I personally visited in the Netherlands.
Visiting Haarlem for the first time was a really eye-opening experience for me, as it was the first time I realized that even a city of about 160,000 people could be really active and lively, and I talked about that in the very first video on this channel.
I don't want to keep pausing the video because it's a very long video, but I didn't know Haarlem only had 160,000 people. That's really, really crazy, because just being there, I would have thought it had upwards of maybe 400,000 people. The city that I come from, Louisville, Texas, just for reference, has a very similar population, maybe 130, 140,000 people. And rest assured, it does not look anything like this at all. There is no part of Louisville that has this kind of liveliness and density to it.
My hometown has over 3 times the population, and you'd need a 50-car pileup to see this many people outside of their cars at one time. This is entirely because of the design of Haarlem and its pedestrianized city center. I took our kids to Leiden to visit the Natural History Museum, again, trivially easy to access by train and a short walk. This is literally the only video I took of Leiden, this crosswalk. This amazed me because it was such a safe crossing, where the street was narrowed with this big pedestrian island. Oh, okay. I was clearly easily impressed in those early days, but seriously, this would not exist in any city this size in Canada, and that's really sad, right? I did a similar thing in the town of Harlingen, where the only video I took was this one. Again, of a safe crosswalk. In this case, the crossing is raised to slow down drivers. If you live in Canada, you have to get all your neighbors together and fight for years to get something like this installed, but in the Netherlands, they're just all over the place and usually installed by default.
One of the most interesting things about the Netherlands is it's a better place than the US, at least. I've never been to Canada, but it's a better place for walking, cycling, and driving. So as far as getting from place to place, which for most people, that's a natural part of their day-to-day lives, it's pretty much better no matter what form of transportation you take. No matter if you walk, cycle, or drive, you'll have a much better, much easier time getting to your destination, and then the destination generally looks better and is pragmatically better than your American equivalent.
For a while, we were attending some speed cubing competitions. This meant that we had to travel to some very random places in the Netherlands. This is Lent, which is basically a suburb of Nijmegen. We hadn't been in the Netherlands for long at this point, so everything was new to us. I remember it being so amazing that we could so easily take a train to the other side of the country, and when we got there, it was safe for our whole family, including our kids, to cycle by themselves to the neighboring town. There was also this separated bicycle path that I remember thinking was really high quality, especially in such a small city. This bridge was really cool too, and it was interesting how they cut through this old tower to build this bicycle path. I remember thinking that only the Netherlands would care enough about bicycle infrastructure to do this. The other fascinating thing about Lent was that it felt very suburban with lots of single-family homes, but it was still perfectly safe to cycle through, and there were so many families out on bicycles.
This suburb right here looks very similar to the suburb that I was in the Netherlands before we went to Fasten, which I'm not going to say the exact city we were in, but it's in Brabant, I'll just say that. And some people actually were able to identify which suburb I was walking in some of my videos because they're that familiar with the area. But I feel like there are quite a few suburbs like this in the Netherlands, and that's a big misconception. People think, oh, well, I don't want to live in a city center with all of these people. Newsflash, they have suburbs there too. But not only do they have suburbs, you have bike lanes within the suburbs, and you have public transit within the suburbs, so everything is interconnected. And when it comes to having kids, which most people who move to the suburbs have kids or plan on having kids, they have a lot more freedom to operate at their own discretion, because how are they going to get hit by a car when they're riding on the bike lane?
These kind of suburban streets cut off to through traffic by cars are ideal routes for cycling without having to build any dedicated cycling infrastructure at all. There are no bike lanes needed here because the speed and volume of cars was so low. Suburban streets lined with single-family homes but still safe for cycling just absolutely blew our minds. Another speed cubing competition was in Ermelo. Again, our destination in this small town was easily accessible by train plus bicycle. What amazed me was that a town this small, 27,000 people, would have so many trains going to it. And within...
For some reason, I didn't know you could take your bike on the train. I always thought you weren't allowed to do that on the NS trains, but I guess you can, based on this video.
A ridiculous amount of bicycles parked out front. The other thing that surprised me was the traffic calming. That's the infrastructure that's used to slow and restrict car traffic. So many streets were cut off to car traffic, and again, it was easy to cycle everywhere without any dedicated cycling infrastructure. I talked about this in one of my very early videos about traffic calming on this channel. This one little town had more traffic calming measures than I've seen in literally any city of any size in Canada. And when it comes to small towns in Canada, they're all extremely car-centric. They are legitimately terrible places to be, despite them being small enough to easily cycle from one end to the other.
I just want to point out really quickly,
Places to be, despite them being...
look at the quality of this road right here. This is what I mean when I say, if you're Dutch, you need to be grateful every single day of how nice your roads are. Because it is not like that in the US, and evidently it's not like that in Canada either, because this is just absolutely atrocious. And people talk about, oh, well, it's because it gets cold in the winter, so they have to salt the roads. It gets cold in the Netherlands as well, but I have never seen a road that looked like this in the Netherlands in my entire time there.
They're all extremely car-centric. They are legitimately terrible places to be, despite them being small enough to easily cycle from one end to the other. So being in a small town that wasn't lined with strip malls and overrun by cars was just incredible. It really became clear to me that to make a place friendly for cycling, it was more important to restrict cars than it was to build a bunch of expensive bicycle infrastructure. After all, protected bike lanes are really just an extension of car infrastructure, right? You don't need bike paths if you don't have a lot of cars.
It's true.
We also attended a speed cubing competition in Veenendaal. This town deserves its own video someday, as it's often considered to be the best city for cycling in the Netherlands.
Wow.
The exit to the train station is right at this nice cycling path, and it connects directly to this pedestrianized shopping center. Totally accessible by foot or by bicycle, without ever interacting with any cars at all. And this isn't even the main train station. This is the suburban station in a place with only 65,000 people. Like, I would absolutely never see this in Canada anywhere, never mind the suburbs of a small city. We took a vacation to Terschelling, an island in the North Sea. I was amazed that we could take a train directly to the ferry, and when we got to the island, we could rent e-bikes and cycle everywhere. We were even staying on a farm, like an actual rural farm, and it was still easily accessible by separated paths that were only used by bicycles and tractors.
One thing that I think a lot of Americans would not know about the Netherlands unless they've been there before is how much farming goes on there. Now, of course, the Netherlands is one of the agricultural strong points of Europe, at least as far as I'm aware, but seeing how they integrate farms and ranches literally into suburban neighborhoods like the one we saw earlier was mind-blowing to me. Seeing how you could be in a suburb with bus stops and bike lanes, and you can literally walk 5 to 10 minutes and just have a big field with cows and horses and other animals. That blew me away. I'm not gonna lie.
This country never ceases to amaze me. We went on vacation to a small camping area outside of Ulmen. Again, small town, 18,000 people. Obviously, a lot of people drive here, but there are still alternatives for walking and cycling. I drove around to take a look at the town and saw traffic calming everywhere. Look at the traffic calming on this main residential street. There is no way this would exist in a town this small in North America. This street would be wide and straight, high speed, and have lots of cars. People who would have signs on their lawns telling drivers to slow down, and nobody would let their kids out in the street.
Come to think of it, now that he mentions that, I don't think I ever saw that in the Netherlands. That is something that I did see a lot growing up, was people would have those signs on their lawns saying slow down, children at play, so on and so forth. But they don't have those in the Netherlands because, well, the urban planners simply take that into account. And you can see that abundantly clearly in this video.
It's just a totally different way to design a residential area. I was also surprised at how good the new road infrastructure was. You can see a very clear separation between streets and roads. There are no stroads here. For example, the businesses in this industrial area were accessible by streets separated from the main road, and accessible by roundabout. I talked about this in more detail in my video about stroads. Of course, there was a train station with a huge amount of bicycles outside of it. Again, this would just never exist in North America in a town this size. We also stayed at a campground near Diepenheim, and I had to drive there to buy groceries. I think this place surprised me the most because less than 3,000 people live here. And yet there were lovely houses on small streets, traffic calming of course, and people of all ages cycling everywhere. What was even crazier was the time we ended up in Utrecht. There was nice traffic calming everywhere, we saw lots of people cycling, but I really wanted to film this because it's a great example of rural transit in the Netherlands. A bus stop with a bicycle rack so that people can cycle to the bus stop. And this bus stop has buses that come every 12 minutes. And
America has no excuses. Look, when we took our cross-country road trip, and if you don't know what I'm talking about, go and look at some of my recent videos. My girlfriend and I drove across the US twice, basically, or really 3 times. And along the way, we saw a lot of small towns. A lot of very, very small towns with similar populations as what you can see here. And we never saw a place that was that small with bike lanes. Literally never, not even once. In fact, a lot of those places didn't even have sidewalks. It was impossible, literally impossible, to get anywhere without a car, because you would have houses where their driveways took them out to a street or a road that had a 40 or 50 mile per hour speed limit. Honestly, I wouldn't even feel comfortable driving my car out of that driveway, much less walking or cycling out of that driveway. And a lot of these areas also weren't very well lit. So, again, America has no excuses. I don't know why the Netherlands is so far ahead, but America needs to start taking notes.
And get this, for a village of 265 people, I know of cities 1,000 times that size in Canada that have less frequent bus service. We took our kids to the Bonami Computer Museum in Zwolle. This is on the edge of the city, about 4 kilometers from the train station, but it was still trivially easy and safe to get to by bicycle. The population of Zwolle is about 120,000 people. It was amazing to us how even these places in a random business park at the edge of a small town were still accessible to us with a train plus bicycle combination. I had never seen anything like this before. Also, the computer museum is amazing. You should go if you're nearby. We stayed for a few days at a campground near Assen, so I took a drive into town to check it out. Of course, I was able to easily pick up an Ofe Fiets rental bicycle from the bicycle parking garage at the train station. I wanted to come here because David Hembro, a British blogger who runs the blog A View from the Cycle Path, lives in Assen and talks about it a lot. It was again an absolutely lovely small city, and it was really pleasant to walk around. And there were lots of nice residential neighborhoods all over. Of course, the cycling infrastructure was absolutely top-notch, despite it.
When you see weather like this in the Netherlands, and I've heard it's been particularly sunny this year, 2025. Could be wrong because I'm not there, but when you have weather like this in the Netherlands, it's hard to want to be anywhere else. Because for a lot of people, the weather is kind of the only drawback. So when you have these blue skies and that sunshine, and it's probably not even that hot either, it's probably objectively the best place to be on the planet, and that's no exaggeration.
Despite it being a city of less than 70,000 people. One of the suburbs of Assen, called Kloosterveen, looked cool on the map, so I decided to cycle out there. Of course, it was always perfectly safe and comfortable, and there were many other people out cycling as well for all kinds of trips. I just couldn't believe how good a small city could be. Kloosterveen itself was also really nice, despite it being a modern development. There was a mix of housing types, including single-family homes, and they were all connected by car-free walking and cycling paths. The crazy-looking circle thing was a pedestrianized center with underground parking and apartments, and all the shops you'd need on a regular basis. This proved to me once again that modern suburban neighborhoods don't have to be car-centric and crappy.
Honestly, it doesn't really matter where you are in the Netherlands. I feel like a lot of the city center shopping areas look kind of similar to this. You see a lot of mid-rise development. You usually have an area where you can't drive, or if you can drive, traffic is very limited, and it's primarily pedestrian traffic. And again, it doesn't matter if you're in Tilburg or a place like Vassen, the same general structural layout applies. Whereas in the US, a lot of times you have to be in a much larger city to receive this kind of experience. A much larger, more expensive city, might I add.
I do think that Assen should have a tram line, though. Its public transportation is decent, but it's only buses. While we were driving back to Amsterdam, we wanted to stop at a grocery store, so we went to this random neighborhood called Vathorst outside of Amersfoort. Again, totally blown away. Look at this place. This is as suburban as it gets, right off the highway, but there was a traffic calming, a nice little shopping area that's within walking distance of houses. I meant to come back to film this, but I never did. But it really shows that good urbanism is everywhere in the Netherlands, even in new developments. It's not just reserved for a handful of old neighborhoods in the biggest cities, like it is in Canada. We decided to spend a few days in the town of Woerden because it looked nice. I'm starting to sound like a broken record here, but again, it was absolutely wonderful. There were pedestrianized streets all over the city center and lots of people out.
There's always a lot of sitting areas like this as well in those city centers. And again, when you have weather like this, in an environment like this, devoid of vehicular traffic, so you don't have a bunch of road noise, they don't have excessively loud music like you do in a lot of American cities, which if you watched my Touring the USA series that I mentioned earlier, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Hint, hint, Las Vegas. You honestly have, in my opinion, one of the most serene experiences that you can have as a human. And I know it may sound like I'm exaggerating and I'm just pedestalizing the Netherlands, but I truly believe the Netherlands, and I'm not very well traveled across Europe, by the way, but I do believe the Netherlands sets the standard for what constitutes a high quality of life, or at the very least, what constitutes good infrastructure that facilitates a high quality of life. Now, as you can see, there are 6 minutes left in this video, but I think you kind of get the point by now that small towns in the Netherlands are pretty much not only better than small towns in America, but in many ways better than big towns in America. Because in small towns in the Netherlands, you get the best of both worlds. You get to be isolated and have your space or whatever, but you also have stuff like this. You get to have your cake and eat it too. Now, if you want to watch the rest of this video, I'll have a link in the description as always. But one thing is for absolute certain. I want to move to the Netherlands. I want to move back to the Netherlands, and honestly, I think I want to move to a small town in the Netherlands in particular.